and welcome to Terra Verde, a weekly environmental public affairs program co-hosted by Earth Island Journal and KPFA. My name is Hannah Wilton, and I'm your host on the show today. Joining me on the show is filmmaker Kyle Baker, director of the film Fog Eaters. The film follows environmental toxicologist Peter Weiss-Penzias and a team of researchers on California's Central Coast as they investigate unusually high levels of mercury found in mountain lions and then eventually tracing the contamination back to the fog. Kyle Baker is a documentary filmmaker and editor whose work explores intersections of music, labor, and more than human worlds. His work has screened at the Telluride Film Festival, the International Documentary Film Festival in Amsterdam, the Smithsonian, and community screenings around the country. Hey, Kyle, thanks so much for coming on to Terra Verde.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Sure. Well, to start us off, hoping you can just give us a lay of the land and introduce listeners to the film. Like, what's really the story at the center of Fog Eaters?
Yeah, the story of fog eaters is one of pollution, I would say, to put it simply. Um, it's a story about the interconnectedness of our environment, um, and really, I think, frames humans as part of the environment versus outside of it. The main subject of the film, as people might guess, is the fog itself. So we made the hard decision, eh, and put a lot of thought into the decision to anthropomorphize the fog. So the fog is actually the narrator of our film, and so we kind of start in this world of fog, um, with our narrator who's taking us through the kind of poetic and intellectual points of the film, and really we're drifting through the Bay Area. We're drifting through San Francisco streets at night and over the Golden Gate Bridge and into the rolling hills of Marin County, and kind of beginning with the fog, to start this journey with Peter Weiss-Penzias, who's the toxicologist you mentioned, who will kind of take us through his research. So the film opens, and throughout the whole film, it's a short film, it's 20 minutes. Throughout the whole film, there's a bit of a dialogue that we construct between sort of the documentary aspects of Peter's work and research over the years, in conversation with the fog itself.
And what is it that, it's we're tracing mercury through this food web from mountain lions, then to deer, to lichen, and then all the way to the fog. So maybe you could walk us through some of what the scientists actually discover in their research.
Absolutely. Um, so uh, Peter Weiss-Penzias works at UC Santa Cruz, and a number of years ago, he was just biking to work, up on the hill at Santa Cruz and biking through the fog. And being a toxicologist, as he got soaked by the fog, he just kind of thought to himself, like, what's in the fog? What can survive in the fog that might not survive in rain or other sources of water? Um, so just with that simple experience of biking to work, he kind of figured out how to collect fog water, um, and they found kind of these shockingly high levels of methyl mercury in the fog. Um, so I would note that methyl mercury is different from elemental mercury, and this is a little bit of chemistry I've been learning through the process of this film. Methyl mercury, uh, in terms that I can understand too, in layman's terms, methyl mercury has to do with bacterial communities that kind of colonize elemental mercury. So, and that's really important to the story because uh, methyl mercury has the ability to bioaccumulate through food webs, be digested, and kind of bioconcentrate and bioaccumulate in the in multiple environments. So um, I'll kind of take you through this how the film treats this story of bioaccumulation. Is that we kind of begin at the top of the food web, where Peter and his team were actually finding uh, high concentrations of methylmercury in mountain lions. So these are kind of these iconic species, these, as people in the scientific community like to say, these kind of charismatic megafauna who are um, can become sort of I don't like this term I'm about to use, but poster children of you know, environmental degradation. So uh, so he went out with the mountain lion research group, and they were finding these really high level, dangerously high levels of mercury. They test in mountain lions. They test their whiskers and fur, um, and they were finding these really high levels of mercury. So they figured, well, um, you know, this mercury is coming from somewhere. So I think because of the methyl mercury, they realized it was bioaccumulating, so it must be coming through the diet of the mountain lions. So they traced the mercury to um, the prey of the mountain lions, which they kind of discovered was exclusively deer. They just they only predate on deer. So when they then check the fur of deer, they find kind of a similarly high concentration of methylmercury. Um, with the deer who are vegetarians, you know, they eat grass and leaves and plants. They they weren't having much luck finding traces of mercury in those in plant material because it actually um, it's a bit unstable methylmercury, so it sort of it doesn't stick around in certain vegetation. Um, but interestingly, they decided to test lichen, um, and lichen are kind of, as Peter describes in the film, lichen are kind of these receptors to the environment that they're really hardy. They don't have any roots, so they're growing on trees and rocks and kind of absorbing what's in the atmosphere. So putting those things together, you know, knowing that there was already mercury in fog, knowing that there's this really high concentration of mercury in the food web, lichen was kind of this like keystone piece of this puzzle because lichen is actually absorbing moisture from the air. Um, so so putting everything together, um, they're kind of coming from both directions of the food web. This mercury is coming in on the fog. It's bioaccumulating into the lichen. When the deer eat the lichen, it bioaccumulates, so it becomes there's more mercury parts per million or parts per billion, which is how bioaccumulation works. So it becomes there's a greater amount of mercury of methylmercury in the lichen, more in the deer than more in the mountain lions, and that's where it can become dangerous.
Fog is such an elusive subject, as you were speaking to, and is also really difficult to study scientifically. At one point in the film, Peter says that studying fog is like, quote, tracking a wild animal. And I kind of have two questions about this. One is, first, like, how do scientists actually sample fog? We see this a little bit in the film. I'd love what you learned about that process. And second, more kind of from an artistic perspective, what you learned through the process of following this kind of more quiet, slow moving subject.
Yeah, so in the film you'll see um, what are called standard fog collectors. So it's just a big square meter of mesh. Um, and what's happening is that if you put these fog collectors as they are in the film on a cliff, maybe above the ocean or in really foggy areas, when the fog rolls in, it hits these collectors, and it's actually this special kind of mesh where you know, the water droplets from the fog just kind of roll off of this mesh into a bucket, and that's where they test the water. So it sounds high tech when you say fog collector, but it's quite rudimentary. Though I will say the mesh is pretty elaborate and kind of expensive. I learned but all in all, they're just kind of testing water that's in this little plastic bucket. So that's one way to catch it. I think there are other methods, and Peter is also kind of involved in um, a little bit of a citizen scientist project, um, and has his own company where he's trying to make fog collectors kind of more commercially available and desirable. So he's been working with his students and students kind of in the arts department at the university to design fog collectors that maybe people would like to have in their yards and kind of look nicer than just a big square piece of mesh. Um, so yeah, and then that's generally how they collect it. And I think yeah, fog to me as a subject, like you're saying, it's so elusive. It's so it's so alive. Um, I think the more people I told about this film as I started embarking on even thinking about the film would would send me their own fog videos. So it's really alluring to people, I think, and it's really if you live in the Bay Area, like most listeners, it's a bit of a tricky relationship with fog because it kind of when it rolls into Dolores Park and it kind of like ruins your picnic or something, everyone's gonna scatter. So not everyone loves the fog. Probably it makes you cold and it makes the world a little bit socked in. But I think there's also a deep appreciation for the beauty of fog, and so that was something I was keenly aware of just when I was sharing with friends and colleagues about um, going out and trying to film it. I think as a filmmaker, it was definitely a big challenge because of how elusive it is. I think about May to October is fog season in the Bay Area. But when you want something bad enough, it's going to sort of evade you somehow. So I couldn't tell you the amount of times me and my small crew went out and tried looking for the fog where it always would be hanging out and kind of struck out. But the moments where it was there, we kind of try to make the most of it. So yeah, I think it's endlessly fascinating as a subject, and I will say uh, my last film and some ongoing projects uh, are about salmon in California and the Pacific in general, and they might be like slightly more elusive than the fog, but I think it's part of a thread of my filmmaking somehow that these subjects are a little bit hard to track down.
Would love for you to bring in some of that history around mercury pollution and mining in California, like what you learned about that through the process of making this film.
Yes, absolutely, and probably yeah. Second to is this going to kill me is the question of, well, where's the mercury coming from? Is kind of the most common question I get about this film. So um, yeah, there's kind of Peter breaks this down in the documentary too. Um, as he puts it, there's kind of two main sources of mercury in the ocean. I mean, mercury as an element is naturally occurring, so it's been here since like the existence of planet Earth. Um, but the two kind of categories that Peter talks about are the combustion of fossil fuels. So the main byproduct of coal-fired power plants and sort of big, large industrial scale emitters is mercury. Um, so um, this accumulation of mercury output globally. Um, I think coal-fired power plants are kind of the most easily imaginable sort of emitter, but really burning fossil fuels at any level is going to be emitting mercury into the atmosphere, and mercury then kind of cycles the globe. Um, and as he describes in the film too, and this is part of my education, there is this huge global cycling of mercury where it travels in the air and all the way up to in the atmosphere and all the way to the stratosphere and then kind of falls back down into the ocean. So there's always this kind of imminent returning, So the idea of a smokestack is that we kind of blow all of our pollution up into the air, and then it's not going to come back. And in fact, well, it does come back, um, and it accumulates in the ocean. And um, because of this huge concentration of mercury that ends up in the ocean, um, that's kind of what gets that gets methylated and then gets kind of taken up by the fog. The other category of why there's so much mercury in the ocean now um, is a little bit less researched. I would have to say, um, but there's plenty of evidence locally and regionally, especially in the Bay Area, that and we think of when we think of California, the gold rush era um, uh, brought so much mercury and introduced so much mercury into the environment that there's plenty of studies where there's a lot of legacy mercury left over in lakes and streams. The central coast of California was a huge mercury mining area. So if anyone's ever, there's a park in San Jose called Quicksilver Park. Um, we actually went and filmed there because there's a couple of abandoned mercury mines. Um, I don't know the exact process, but mercury was actually mined to help with gold extraction. So there's something in the extraction of gold and like maybe the process of cleaning it off, um, where they needed a lot of liquid mercury. So a lot of that, that stuff doesn't really go anywhere. So that's in the soil still, and eventually it runs off. And in the case of the Bay Area, everything goes into the bay. So you know, again, not there's not a ton of conclusive research. According to Peter, who's a hard scientist and is very much about the facts. Um, but logic would tell us that there's that legacy is playing a part of it. And I think one thing I liked including in the film and I thought was important was that the mines in the San Jose area are actually named after mining districts in Europe. One of them is in Spain. I think the other one might be in Portugal. But yeah, New Idria and New Almaden were both kind of European mining centers. And uh, when European colonizers came to California, they sort of reenacted the same extractive industry and even renamed the places the same. So to me, there's a little bit of there's a colonial narrative here that was really important to include in this film about the fog. So just another point of interconnection.
You spoke about this point of this colonial narrative, and one of the in the film it speaks to the term fog eaters and like where that comes from. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So when I was kind of conceptualizing this film back in 2022, and I happened to be on a trip up the California coast, and I was in Mendocino, and someone had recommended a great little cafe called Fog Eater Cafe, and it kind of struck me in the middle of my meal there that I was like, wait, this fog film that I'm thinking about is all about the food web, and it's all about how fog is part of the food web, and it's like this kind of nobody thinks about fog as part of the food web. So I thought, kind of struck me that fog eaters might be an interesting title for this piece. And a couple months later, once I had kind of sunk my teeth into that title and realized it was really the right one, I emailed the cafe, Fog Eater Cafe, asked them. I don't know what made me ask them how they came up with the name, but maybe he was slightly asking for permission too. I don't remember, but uh, one of the owners or founders told me he was very excited to tell me that the term fog eater actually came from this language called Boontling, and Boontling is a kind of a conglomerate language that was developed in the Anderson Valley up near Mendocino, um, like in the later part of the 19th century, and it's kind of historicized in a way as a language that um, kept the community insular and kind of kept outsiders out. Um, I don't think language is like that simple, so it's a little bit of a tenuous history. It is a strange language because it's kind of French and Russian and English and Pomo, which is a native language from up there, um, kind of combined. And there's a few speakers today that still speak the language, and it sounds a bit like sounds like English when you hear it. It just doesn't really make sense because it sounds like an auctioneer is speaking really fast or something. But yeah, so it's fog eaters as part of this Boontling language, which may be the subject of a future film. Who knows?
I'm sure you get this question all the time, but I think listeners will really want to know, like, should they be worried about being out in the fog or drinking fog water if anyone's filling a cup? Are there any
Yeah.
public health implications here?
Um, I would say Peter's main message, because he gets this question a lot, is that there's more mercury in bananas that we eat than we would get through the fog. I think the specific research he's doing is all about bioaccumulation through food webs that humans are a little bit outside of. We're not eating plant material or deer, per se on large scales. Um, so it's really all about this like specific food chain. Um, that being said, there's not a lot of research being done on this. So yeah, I think Peter advocates for kind of testing water and testing food, and I think that there's FDA regulations and things like that. So no, I wouldn't be too concerned from a human perspective, but I think that's also kind of the thing that the film is trying to bust is like a human exceptionalism. So yeah, we should be worried, even if it's not on our plates per se.
Yeah, I want to ask also about some of the stylistic approach to the film and perhaps some of the influences that have shaped your approach. It feels really patient and really meditative, but then also, like you were saying, sometimes a bit, or I was saying, sometimes a bit ominous or maybe a bit otherworldly. There's some like tilting that's happening.
Mhm.
And yeah, would love to give you an opportunity to speak to your artistic background and
Mhm.
perspective.
Yeah, thanks. I think from sort of an environmental thought, environmental theory perspective, I lived in Santa Cruz myself. That's where I met Peter, and kind of quickly discovered the work of Donna Haraway and Anna Singh. And there's a whole community of scholars who are kind of come out of that school of thought around, multi-species, companion species, um, sort of environmental theory, anthropology. I think I like to call it environmental humanities because it's very humanities based. But yeah, Don Haraway and Anna Singh's work has been really inspirational. Anna Singh has a sort of an ongoing web project called Feral Atlas, and the core concept there is feral ecologies. So it's kind of ecologies born around human infrastructure that are no longer under human control. Um, so I think the fog kind of fits right in there. In fact, there's a number of pieces about Peter's research within the Feral Atlas that people can look up. Um, and yeah, from a more stylistic perspective, when I first heard about this story when I was a student at Santa Cruz, I kind of thought to myself it sounded a bit stranger than fiction. It sounded a bit sci-fi, and that kind of intertwined for me with the sense of uh, this like search through the food web. So with a film background, I was kind of in somewhere between sci-fi and film noir stylistically. So yeah, putting all those things together, we made this film.
And yeah, wondering, as you're putting this film out and it's showing in film festivals, and what are you really hoping that audiences are walking away with, maybe thinking about or perhaps paying more attention to?
Hmm. Yeah, great question. Um, I think I think this question about, oh, is this bad for me? Is this bad for human beings? Is you know I would walk away from it watching this with that question too. I think I would want people to take that next step, and like we were talking about, that just kind of shake that human exceptionalism that is kind of at the core maybe of all of our environmental issues, and realize that yeah, every what Peter says verbatim in the film is that there is no a way, and I think it's a good lesson to learn, whether it's affecting humans or our sort of the species that we rely on, whether we know it or not. Um, yeah, our habits collectively are you know creating an imbalance. So whether that translates as like advocacy for people or testing their food or water, or just kind of going out into the world with less of a human centric view, then yeah, I would be happy.
Mm. Well, just as we're closing here in our last minute, just want to give you an opportunity to share where listeners can go to learn more about your work, and perhaps watch the film online or in theaters.
Yeah, for sure. The film is on. We're kind of in the festival circuit now. It's playing at the Palm Springs Shorts Film Festival, and that's on June 26th. And it's playing in Nevada City in that same weekend, the weekend of June 28th. So that's a little bit closer to the Bay Area for folks. Um, and we're just starting this festival journey, so there's a number of upcoming announcements that we'll make soon. Eventually, the film will be available online. We're trying our best to get it out on a popular news outlet. So one way or another, it'll be streaming, I would say, by January of next year.
Well, thanks so much, Kyle, for coming on today. We're going to go ahead and close the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks to everyone who tuned in to listen, especially all of the supporters of KPFA who make our independent broadcast efforts possible. Your support keeps us on the air, so please consider making a donation to KPFA today to keep community radio alive and thriving.
There are easier ways to do radio than this. Corporate sponsors, paywalls, wealthy backers calling the shots. KPFA chose a different path. Listener-funded, independent, accountable to the community instead of advertisers. And for 77 years, listeners like you have made that possible. Guardians, our monthly sustainers, support KPFA at whatever level works for them. $5 a month can make a real difference when enough people come together to give. Because independent media does not survive automatically. It survives because people decide it should. Join them. You pick the number, we'll keep the radio on. kpfa.org.
You're listening to 94.1 KPFA in Berkeley, 89.3 KPFB in Berkeley, 88.1 KFCF in Fresno, and online everywhere at kpfa.org.